what are some of our histories. I just hit record. You'll all get a notice. I meant to do that at the beginning. Then we're going to have our Women's Fund staff and intern share with you what it means to us to be advocates and why this is important work for us at the Women's Fund. One of the most exciting things for me about the I Am an Advocate series is that every meeting we will have someone sharing their advocate story with you. And I'm super excited about our advocate who's sharing today. Actually, I'm very excited about our advocates sharing the whole series, but extra excited today. And then we'll end with a chance for you all to reflect on your relationship with advocacy. And then we'll stop recording at the end and open up for any questions or comments or sharing that anyone in the audience would like to make. So this is the super abbreviated Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga and Advocacy Relationship story. The Women's Fund has a long history of advocacy. In fact, that was sort of, or precisely, the impetus for the Women's Fund defining their mission and their work. And this is something that we continue today. So in 2008 is the best date that I have. The Women's Fund really committed to addressing root causes of inequity and had their first big meeting that was about raising awareness, educating, and teaching about the issues at the Women's Summit at UTC. And since that time in 2008, the Women's Fund has continued to host various meetings and opportunities for people to learn about the issues, or we've lifted up our voices to educate people about the issues, including things like launching a human trafficking hotline campaign, hosting a training for nonprofits so that they can get involved in advocacy on the legislative side, holding a women's healthcare convening, and since 2018, holding legislative advocacy action meetings very regularly that are open to the public during legislative season, sharing what's happening in our legislature that impacts women, families, and communities. And part of our advocacy work has really always been about lobbying to a good degree on a grassroots level for or against pieces of Tennessee legislation that either benefit or harm women and their families. And these are the numbers that I know are most accurate. Since 2014, we have successfully advocated for or against 38 pieces of Tennessee legislation. And those would be different bills and laws in the Tennessee legislature that either negatively impact women that we lobby against or positively impact women and their families that we have lobbied for. And we have also written and passed 4 bills in Tennessee, and we have 2 that we are actively seeking sponsors for the upcoming legislative session. So that's really exciting. That is a part of our work that we continue to grow and that continues to be built out. And so the Women's Fund has always been committed to advocacy, starting at education, leading to encouraging people to use their voices, moving on to the legislature when it comes to writing and passing laws. And, you know, that's sort of this meat of our work. And this first session is about taking a step away from that dense material and getting more into what makes each of us an advocate and what makes each of you an advocate. So what we're going to do now is just take just a few moments, and we're going to have the Women's Fund staff share their advocacy and me stories, right? The moments of why did we decide to engage in this sort of work? Why are we investing in this work? Why is the Women's Fund's work so important to us and so critical to us to make a positive change in Tennessee and in Chattanooga and eventually, and also at a federal level? and I'll give you a chance to make a federal change at the end. But I'm going to hand off to our executive director, Erica Burnett, and let her just share a little bit about why advocacy is important to her.
Thanks, Janine. And it's so good to see a lot of familiar faces and lots of new friends. I'm Erica Burnett. This is Nubia. And I serve as the executive director for the Women's Fund. She's upset, y'all. I just turned off her video that she was watching while we were meeting. I was thinking as Janine gave me this reflection earlier this week, and what's the framing for me? And the reality is advocacy, even before understanding what that word really means, has always been a part of not only my life, but really my community and my family, right? So really being rooted early on in this orientation of making sure that folks have access, even without using that language. And for me, that's really at the heart of our advocacy work. I don't like the word no. My mother says I came out with a plan and an opinion, and I'm thankful that my planning and my opinions thus far have been in service of things that are good for our communities. But what it really means and how it matters to me is in the spaces where we have the ability to do, whether it's to change opinions, whether it's to shift laws, whether it is to educate and equip individuals, that we are bringing folks along. I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the word empower. It sort of implies that we have something in our possession that others don't. But I do appreciate the value behind understanding our agency in spaces and how we're able to leverage that in a way that allows other people to realize their power, their rights, what they should have access to in ways that maybe have not been done historically. And I think the Women's Fund, I know the Women's Fund, we do that both from a state level, but we also do that through gatherings like this, equipping individuals to understand and better be able to navigate the landscape around us that will allow not only themselves access in places that matter, but ultimately our community members who are most vulnerable and who are ultimately further away from the center of power as by design in our community.
Thanks, Erica. And I'm going to hand off to Katie Mccauley. Oh, there you are. I can't find you on my screen. Our director, programs and operations director, the person who makes us all stay on track.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Mccauley. I've been a staff member with the Women's Fund since 2017. Before that, I've had an interesting journey. I was a board member, and before that, I was a volunteer. And at one time co-chaired the advocacy committee and got to figure out a lot about state level policy and legislation. I will say my journey, my first job out of college, I worked for Habitat for Humanity, and noticed with a lot of our partner families, some of those root causes, I would say, like a lot, the debts they had to do with education and health, and we all know the dearth of lack of affordable housing. So got really interested in that. I actually went to graduate school to a policy to learn more about how do we fix the system or make sure that we're, creating more opportunities. What does that look like? What does that mean? And as my journey and coming back to Chattanooga, discovered the Women's Fund and was so excited to kind of put my nerdy policy wonkiness to work and continue to be invested in the community. And like I said, how do we use our voices? How do I, frankly, from a place of privilege, like use that in a really positive way, in a way to help make sure that those who haven't had the experiences, the opportunities that I have access to those. So that's
Thanks, Katie. And Last but certainly not least, because she's been my right hand for I don't even know how many months on new projects and fun, we have our graduate policy intern who's working with us this semester, Rebecca Jenkins, who's just going to share a little bit with you about why advocacy in her life, although she was already a pretty accomplished advocate before we were lucky enough to hire her as an intern.
Hey everyone. Like Janine said, I'm Rebecca Jenkins. I am a graduate student at UTC in the public administration program. But my full-time job currently is a bilingual victim advocate for the Chattanooga Police Department. So I've been really fortunate and really excited to work with the Women's Fund and with Janine over a couple of community projects that we have going in the works. And I think based off of my experience as a victim advocate here at the police department, it's been interesting to see how advocacy really doesn't tie you to one specific area. Yes, victims of crime need advocates, but there's a way to be the voice for others in all sorts of different workplaces and other areas of our community. And so it's been interesting to see, learn a little bit more about how I can be a voice for those, even as a Latina woman, speaking up for them in Spanish, but there's other ways too that we can all be involved in our community. And you don't have to have necessarily that work title behind it. You can still get involved in different areas as well, just as a community member that cares about other issues. So.
Thanks, Rebecca. And as a side note, if any of you are interested in or passionate about people having access to diapers in our community, drop Rebecca a note in the chat and we'll talk about it. It's one of our current projects. And I feel like we have a big audience here and someone might know more about a project, including diaper banks on this call, and don't want to pass up the opportunity to reach out. I think it's easy for us on staff, or easier for us on staff, to talk about why advocacy is so important to us, because we do advocacy kind of for a living, right? We are working at an advocacy institute, or an advocacy institution, organization. We are educating folks about it. We are talking about it. We are breathing it, sleeping it, eating it, thinking about it all the time. And for me, advocacy was this really logical path because I'm a doer. I do not sit back and let things happen around me. And I think that anyone who knows me will be able to attest to that. And it's something that I fell into, almost by accident, more out of urgency. But everyone has an advocacy story, and some advocacy stories are really profound, and some advocacy stories are just obvious paths through life for people. But everyone has that story. Everyone on this call has a story. But I'm going to hand off to someone whose advocacy story is pretty amazing, because I'm not completely sure she always knew that she was being an advocate. So Alyssa Giallomas is a very good friend of mine for, I think we're going on a decade now. And I first met her when she was in high school, I think 2011. We met in Guadalajara, of all places. But Alyssa is someone who has a story of growing up advocating for herself out of necessity, for others because she was smart and bold enough to do so all the time, even in her youth. She raised awareness. I've seen her use her social media platform as she's grown into adulthood in ways to educate and raise awareness and teach people and address root causes of inequities that people with disabilities face, to starting her nonprofit. And I thought that she was the perfect person to bring in and have a conversation and share her story with us, to really give everyone a look at how advocacy unfolds in a way that isn't necessarily organizational and structured, and just like the Women's Fund. And so with that, I will hand off to Alyssa. She's also a badass athlete. Forgive me, there's no other way to say it. And I hope she'll share some of that with you to tell her story, and then we'll continue. But Alyssa, I am handing off to you.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. So as Janine said, I am Alyssa Giallomas, and I think my story really starts at the beginning. I was born with something called arthrogryposis. So it affects my hands and my legs. I walk with long leg braces. And I think it really begins with my twin brother, and I have an older sister. And my parents always told me the name of the game was to keep up, right? Like I always wanted to do what my brother was doing. I always wanted to do what my sister was doing. And so they told me that as long as I put my mind to something and I spoke up when I needed help, I would go far. So I think that's really how I started being an advocate for myself, is really through my parents. They told me I could do anything I wanted. I just needed to advocate for myself. And I found that through swimming. And I started swimming when I was 3 years old. And it started as a form of physical therapy, actually. And I've always really loved the water for a couple of reasons. Number one, I always felt free. I didn't have to wear my leg braces, and I could keep up. I felt like my disability disappeared when I was in the water. And number two, I loved swimming because there wasn't any special exceptions for me. You know, like growing up with a disability, there was always people who would run a little slower to tag me out on whatever baseball game I was doing. But swimming, you had to get to the other side of the pool. That was really the name of the game, and you couldn't do anything about it. So I never really knew about the Paralympics. I grew up doing able-bodied sports. I swam on an able-bodied team. And so right around when I was 13 or 14, I'm from Chicago. So Great Lakes Adaptive Sports Association saw me swimming and asked me if I've ever been a part of the Paralympics or like adaptive sports. I said, no, I didn't really know about it. I had a brother and sister at home, and all adaptive sports were about an hour and a half away. So as you probably all know, with children, that's very hard to swing, and I didn't feel like I was missing anything. And so they told me that I should really go check this out. And so I headed up to Minnesota with my mom, not really knowing what was in store for me. I was about 15 years old, and again, I was still swimming on all able-bodied kind of sports. And within 3 days, I was classified in Paralympic swimming, which means you are classified through 1 in 10 comparative of your disability. So you only compete against people who are as able as you are. And for once in my life, the playing field was even. I wasn't racing against people who could kick. And within 3 days, I made my first team of Team USA. I broke an American record, and I was heading to Guadalajara at the end of the year, which is totally crazy. So I feel like a lot of ways I stumbled into success, and all of a sudden I was one of the greatest athletes, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I remember being in Guadalajara, and that's when I met Janine. And I was 15. I didn't really know where this track was going. I came really fast. And I remember I was ranked first going into one of my races. And I had already won 2 silver medals, and I was really excited to be going into this first. And unfortunately, I was out-touched, so I got second. And I remember coming back to the warm-up, and it was just me and Janine. And I was like really upset because I wanted to win. I had that drive. I had that feeling like I wanted to be number one. I didn't want to settle. And I also felt bad because like, who complains about being second? Like, you know, it was like this weird in between. And I remember Janine just looked up at me and gave me the biggest smile. And she said, "This is only the beginning." And I had no idea that I was London material or Rio material. I just kind of knew I was on this track. And she was actually the first person to tell me that I could be one of the best athletes in the world. And so 6 months later, after a whole bunch of training, she was right. I made my first Paralympic team and went to London 2012 at 16. and came back home. It was an incredible experience, and went back to my high school team. And I think this was really the first time I kind of learned how much bigger just the Paralympics were, right? So not only was I kind of changing perceptions about what swimming looked like and what Paralympics looked like, but I was also changing perceptions of what someone with a disability did and who they were and like what kind of sports they were. And I believe that starting of the change is changing people's perceptions, right? Like if you want to change someone's mind or you want someone to believe what you believe, you have to change their perception of whatever that is. And I think through swimming and through the actions I did, I was able to change a lot of people's perception of what a disability looked like and what the Paralympics were. And as the Paralympic movement grew, I learned also how to advocate for myself. I was on the varsity team for my high school, and I was really upset that I couldn't go to state. And so one of my really good friends, she was a year older than me, it was her senior year, she advocated for people with disabilities to swim at state and to recognize that they are a part of the team in high school sports. So I was the first person with a disability to win 6 state titles in high school and the state of Illinois. And I went back and swam Division I with Loyola. And I think that's the second way I was able to kind of really advocate for myself, saying I really wanted to go to school. I really wanted to go to a 4-year community, but also kind of learning how I could swim as well. I was training for Rio, so it was 2 years, and a coach had a program already. And it was really cool because through my 4 years and being a part of this Division I team at Loyola, I was able to show awareness and talk to a whole bunch of other coaches that now have programs all over the United States, not only for Division III, Division II, and Division I for people with disabilities and Paralympians to train at school and swim on a team and also be a Paralympian and travel and be on Team USA, which was awesome. And through that, I also learned just how well my body worked when I took care of it, right? Like I've been an elite athlete for the last 10 years. I swam every day, and learning that through my disability, it also was greatly impacted through everything I did, right? Like I got a little stronger. So those Trader Joe's bags that I went to the grocery store got a little lighter and different things like that. So I graduated and I now live in Arlington, Virginia, and I got a job. And so through that, I also started doing just a bunch of adaptive workouts and kind of putting them on Instagram and different things like that, like finding those fit influencers and adapting it and then showing how I do some of the moves, right? Like because my hands have a little less grip and I use leg braces, so my workouts look a little different. And right around then, I really wanted to create community, and I didn't really know how I wanted to do that yet, right? Like I just graduated, but I knew that this was something I really wanted to do. And COVID hit. And as you all know, everything went virtual as we're sitting here on a Zoom meeting. And I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, like there has to be adaptive workouts out there. Like there has to be some kind of platform that I'm missing that are showcasing this because everyone else went digital and I can't really find adaptive workouts. So through COVID, I just started writing them down and I started realizing what different disabilities and different people needed through that. And after that, I created AMG Fitness, which is adapt, move, and gain. And originally it was just on my Instagram and I was doing Instagram live workouts. And I knew through speaking and talking, I didn't want any of my workouts to be charged. I didn't want people to have to pay more in order to get a great workout, especially as a person with a disability. That wasn't ever something I wanted. So through that, I created a 501c3 nonprofit, all on a platform called amgfitness.org. And it has 3 different programs. Knowing that there's so many different disabilities, how can I incorporate a program for so many people who have so many different needs? And it has the 3 different programs there. One is fully sitting. So anyone in a wheelchair and cannot transfer out of a wheelchair all does my adapt program. So it's all at home. So you can do it whenever you want. And it's all on that platform. My move program is for people who can transfer to the floor and have a little more trunk control. And they're able to get also a great 30-minute HIIT workout. And then my gain program is for people who stand, and the program that I do And through that, I've been learning to advocate for people with disabilities to feel good in their body. You don't have to be a Paralympian. You don't have to travel the world or swim on Team USA to feel good and feel healthy. And that was really what I wanted AMG to be. So it's launched about a month and a half ago. So we're relatively new. And I'm really excited because of the strategic partnerships and donations and fundraising. I'm able to help a lot of different people from all across the country get a little more active at home. And starting in 2020, there will be community events. So you'll be able to meet all these people who are doing your workouts and join, and knowing that whenever you do something, when you do it together, it just makes it even more worthwhile. Anything in health and wellness, everyone knows that you're better when you have a buddy or a partner. And so that's something I'm really excited about. And that is a little bit about me. If you guys want to get involved, you can check out amgfitness.org. And through that is kind of how I advocated for people with disabilities and how my life has been created.
I love how you just matter-of-factly tell us that you created a 501c3 to provide workouts for people with disabilities. And, you know, it's the only online platform that does that for people with disabilities. And, you know, and the thing is that these workouts are accessible to people with disabilities, to the elderly, to all sorts of people. And this is just because, I don't know, because Alyssa's Alyssa and she saw the need and she did that. And I want to thank you. We'll have some time at the end for questions if folks have any, but Alyssa, I want to thank you for sharing that. I think hearing about someone who grew into advocacy from age 3 swimming through high school, through college, through working full-time and creating a nonprofit because there was a need. I think that demonstrates for everyone how, when there's a need and a passion, advocacy can happen. And so thank you. You're the perfect person to launch this series. And, you know, nothing that I say now is going to be nearly as interesting, but I'm going to go back and screen share really quickly one more time before we ask just some questions for a minute to reflect. And so I've put up the definition for advocate. This is from the American Heritage 4th edition, if you're a dictionary nerd like I am. I love dictionaries. And an advocate is one that argues for a cause, is a supporter or a defender, and one that pleads in another's behalf, or an intercessor. And I feel like I'm oddly reminiscing and going back to my teacher days, which I have left happily in the past when I share this definition with all of you. But I strongly believe that something I've inadvertently been leaving out of our advocacy meetings is reflecting on what it really means to be an advocate. And Erica alluded to this as she was sharing her commitment to advocacy at the very beginning of this meeting. At the Women's Fund, we are arguing for causes and supporting and defending. And we often find ourselves in a position of privilege where we are pleading in another's behalf. And we are being that intercessor, right? That person that is speaking for others. And the purpose of this Advocacy Institute is so that more people have the skills, the passion, the interest, the confidence to speak up for themselves as well. So that at the Women's Fund, we can create a community of advocates rather than finding ourselves speaking up for other people as often as we do. And so I think this definition shows us both where we are and why all of you are on this call. You're on this call because you want to be advocates. You want to know more about advocacy. You wouldn't be here on your lunch hour otherwise, but it also gives us a great look at where we want to be going. We want to make sure that advocacy and being an advocate is inclusive of as many people as possible and as many people have the skills that they need to speak up, to be the advocates that they want to be. And I think one of the most common questions that we get at the Women's Fund, and I know Rachel Sossman's on this call and she's our advocacy committee chair. I know that she gets this question all the time. It's, well, how do I get involved? How do I be an advocate? How do I do this? And that's really where we're going to be going over the next few sessions. But also what I want to start to address today. And the first thing is you have to know why you want to advocate. Are you advocating for yourself? Like Alyssa when she started. Are you advocating for others because you see something that they're facing and you believe that you can lift it up? Are you advocating for an issue or an idea? Or are you advocating because you feel called to do it and you cannot imagine anything else that you would ever possibly be doing? And I think that's where any advocacy journey starts. It's with your why. Why is it important for you to be on this call? And you don't have to tell me, though. I welcome you telling me or each other. But I think it is important, you're all here because you care about advocacy and theoretically want to advocate. And I think it's important that we all say, but why? For a lot of us, it's for, 2 or 3 of these reasons. For some of us, it might just be that there is one thing that you saw that was such an injustice that you had to repair it. And suddenly you realized you wanted to use your voice to do more. But before you dive into advocating on behalf of the Women's Fund or another organization, it's important that you always know you're advocating because there's something in you that's driving you there. And that's your why. And the other question that I know I always get, and I know, again, I'm certain that Rachel gets this one too, is what do I need to be an advocate? And the reality is that you don't need a special skill set. And in our next session, we will be breaking down all the different kinds of advocacy and all the different ways that you can use your strengths and the things that you're good at or comfortable doing to be an advocate. We're going to spend the whole next hour talking about that. But at the core of it, to be a great advocate, you have to be passionate about something. And it doesn't have to be a Women's Fund issue. I hope that it will be, and that you will all join me along this path and join the Women's Fund along this path. But you have to be passionate about something that you want to see changed. And you have to be persistent and recognize that change doesn't happen immediately. The hardest thing about advocacy is that it isn't a one-to-one. You don't see a problem and immediately fix it. And there are lots of hills and lots of valleys in the process. You have to have a sense of purpose. And you have to have a support system to be an advocate. Some people would say, I can do it alone. I can lift my voice alone. And they're probably right. But then you hit a wall. And having a support system, having people that understand what you're trying to do or why you're trying to do it is really an important part of anyone's advocacy journey. We spend a lot of time at the Women's Fund talking about the issues that matter most to us organizationally, the issues that promote equity and fairness, the issues that end violence and lift up safety. And those are issues that I hope all of you on this call will continue to learn with us. But what is the issue that you are most passionate about? In my not professional life, I spend a lot of time thinking about the climate. I spend a lot of time thinking about the environment. That is also my passion. And it's okay and even really important to have passions that speak to you. For what it's worth, climate change issues do impact women significantly more than men. So there's still a lot of overlap with what I do at the Women's Fund. But this is all you really need to be an advocate, is passion and purpose, people that you can share that with, and some persistence. And if ever you need someone to lift you up and help you in that path and to be persistent, that is part of what the Women's Fund is here for. That is part of what this Advocacy Institute is about, is being a community and a resource so that people feel confident using their voices and know that they have support. And it doesn't just have to be for the same things that we care about with you. This is about lifting up voices and finding a way to do that. I am quickly running out of time. So as we continue to look forward, what I didn't tell you is the advocacy in me. My purpose. Why did I get into this? Why is this what I choose to do? And why is the Women's Fund the right place to do it? And it goes back to what the women who started this organization in 2008 put in the center of the mission, which is to address the root causes, to repair the things that create inequity, that make things unfair, that make things harder for certain people than they really should be. I don't believe in just putting a Band-Aid on something. I believe in fixing it. And I'm a believer in hard work, and doing the hard work. And so this is where you land to make that sort of change, even though it's really, really difficult. So before I open the floor for questions and discussion, and I even have some questions for you to start discussion if we don't have some, I do want to say, if you aren't already aware, the next I Am an Advocate session is November 18th, and it is going to be in the evening. It's at 5:30. We're trying different times to make sure meetings are accessible and available to additional people. We're going to be talking about all the different types of advocacy, the skills needed to do them, the skills not needed to do them, how to become acquainted with them. There is a link on our website. I will also try to make sure I drop a link in the chat box. I'll also put my email in there if you have any questions. And as we break out for conversation and questions and discussion, questions for Alyssa, questions for Erica, Katie, me, Rachel, our advocacy chairs on this call. I hate to set you up like that, Rachel. I should have given you a heads up. Any questions that you might have. Before I do that, just, I'm not giving homework, but I am saying, if you want to take a minute and really examine what it is about advocacy that appeals to you, I think that will instantly embolden you to be more engaged in an advocacy process. So I am going to stop recording and open the floor for questions. Feel free to unmute and ask anything that you might have. And if there aren't any questions after a minute, I will probably ask a question or two of you. So I'm going to stop the recording.